Howdy, everybody. We're going to make this a short one because I'm going to the airport. And you can see my mess behind me. I travel with the same bag that I use to carry all my mutes and all that stuff. So when I have to travel, I will dump all my mutes. Not literally dump them, but yes, I put the mutes out of the way so that I can use my bag. The bag is all beat up. It's been around the world several times, and all over the country, and all over Houston. It's the you know, my concept for the bag has always been that you know, everything I would ever need for a gig is in there. So, and there's a lot of times when I'm on gigs, right? And I'll be the only one that had whatever it was that we needed because maybe someone didn't say that they needed it. Something like that. I always have all that stuff with me. Pencils, I have, that's the other thing too. Extra bow ties in case someone else, so I think I have 2 bow ties in my bag. So, I've rescued, I guess would be the word. I've rescued quite a few musicians from that predicament of having forgotten their bow ties. So yeah, stuff like that. Extra earplugs and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, yeah, so let me know what you guys want to talk about. If you have any questions at all. Looks like the... Hello, Richard. Nice to see you. It looks like we're kind of down on numbers this week. And that makes sense because there's so much going on. So, you know, I'll never forget. I might have said this before on a previous Q and A. I'll never forget the first time my band played. My jazz group is called Living Rhythms. Has been since like the late 80s. And I'll never forget when we played our first concert and there were like, the whole house was packed. And we had booked 3 weeks. The whole house was packed the first time. The house was about half empty the second time, and then nobody showed up the third time. So, and that I didn't understand back then that that's actually very normal. You'd have to be really, really famous to pull 3 weeks worth of people in like that. So, hello, Javier. Yes, I'm doing good. I hope you guys are all doing well. So, what's up? What do you guys want to talk about? What questions do you have? Richard has a question. Did you ever encounter musical injuries around the diaphragm? Oh, muscle injuries. I must have music on the mind. Muscle injuries around the diaphragm. Going through my index in my head. I don't know that I have. I don't think so. And that's not really something I would know much about either. I don't ever even recall a student having any issues like that. The closest thing I can think of, and I've not had it, but the closest thing I can think of is I've worked with guys that had hernias. Um, and in fact, one of the best lead trumpet players in Houston was a guy that had a hernia for a long time, and he would just get one of those weight belts. I don't know what they're called, like the bodybuilders use them, and he would, like a compression thing, and he would use that to push it in. And he played many gigs like that. Javier says, I got a question about tonalization. Can one practice this exercise one octave higher? Of course you can. So I had a book at one time, and the only reason I'd stopped publishing it. So you guys know that my books have 7 routines in them. The original daily routines had, instead of having names for the different levels, I just called it Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4. So I used to have a book called Groups 8 and 9. That's what it was called. Not a very imaginative name. But it was the same exercises going up to the B flat above high C and then super C. And the reason I stopped publishing that was because everyone was talking about my high note book, and I'm like, that's not a high note book. Stop. If you're using that book to learn how to play high, you've missed the whole point. And then I realized that the people who need those exercises that are higher than that, by the time they get through my system, right? By the time they get through my system where they're playing the tonalization studies up to the G above high C, they don't need to have all that stuff written out for them. That's just ridiculous. So yes, I stopped selling that book because I don't sell high note books. That's the bottom line. I don't do the high note thing. And it really, I mean, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with people using my materials to, out of context. Yes, I want to help you get your range. But if someone buys those 2 routines but haven't done the previous routines, then that's just not right. And by the way, I stopped myself practicing. I practiced groups 8 and 9. I'm running it through my head. I think it was about 15 years that I practiced those extra routines. And then at the end of that, I just decided I don't like playing high notes. So, and here's the bizarre thing. I was willing to let my range suffer and only practice up to G above high C. And so I guess it's been now, I want to say it's almost 20 years since I stopped practicing those exercises. That, almost 20 years since I stopped practicing once a week up to Super C. And I've limited my range now for the last almost 20 years to the G above high C. And my range never went down. In fact, I gained another minor third above what I was already doing by never, ever, ever practicing those notes. And not even trying to get those notes because that's not the kind of player I am, right? So I don't just sit around, hey, let me see how high I can play, right? I don't do that stuff. So the only time I use that stuff really is in improvisation. And I say a minor third. That's probably not really. Yes, you know what? It is actually still true. So in the 90s, there's a recording of me. I was the high school that I used to teach at, the high school for the performing and visual arts here in Houston. Um, they featured me on one of my compositions, and in the middle of my solo, and there's video and everything. I don't know where the video is. I don't have a copy, but there's video of me in the middle of my solo, and it was a blues tune that I wrote that has Coltrane substitutions. Right? A blues tune. I forget what I called it. It was something like oh, I can't remember. It was kind of a sassy title. And so yes, I superimposed Coltrane progressions over the blues and wrote a big band tune over that whole thing. And then in the middle of my solo, in that performance that was having video and obviously recording, I had a E above super C, and this is in the 90s. E above super C, and I thought, hey, this sounds pretty good. Let's hold on to it. So I think I held it for like 6 or 8 beats before I cascaded back down from that. So uh, the the fact that I don't like to play high notes doesn't mean I don't play high notes. If it's part of the gig, then I do it. But my point is I never lost that range. By not practicing those notes, I never lost it. Now my range, depending on, it's not every day, it's not consistent, but my range, I've had times when the G above super C was just as solid as that. Um, oh, Richard says, did you hear about Chick Corea? No, I didn't, but I'm assuming that when you say what a loss, that he probably passed away, huh? You know, for a long, long time, Chick Corea, I had more albums from him than I did anybody else. And I think what attracted me to his work was that his all of his albums were programmatic, right? So they all had themes and told a story. And that's why he could have those really interesting album covers, right? So, like The Leprechaun, that's a great album. I had that one. Um, and the reason I say for a long time was when we switched over to CDs, I didn't buy as many of his CDs as I had bought of his albums. So I used to have more albums of Chick Corea than I did anybody else. And second in line was Wynton Marsalis. Um, there's My Spanish Heart. That's an amazing album. What else? Uh, of course, everyone knows about Return to Forever, Majestic Warrior, whatever it's called. Rory, I don't know how to say your name. Rory, Rory Wilson. Um, he says, general question: how relevant do you think the trumpet instrumental music is compared to the predominance of vocal popular music? The number of views on YouTube. So I don't think the trumpet will ever be as popular as the voice. Rory, okay, very good. Thank you for helping me with that. I like to know how the people pronounce their names. So thanks for that. I don't think the trumpet will be ever as popular as trumpet music, I mean, will ever be as popular as the vocal stuff, and it's just because of the musical intelligence of the general public. So that's part of it, and I don't mean that. Hello, Gabriel. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, okay? So don't ever think that I'm saying that people are idiots. Um, okay, it's Irish. Um, I've got family in Ireland on my wife's side. They live in Bunclody. So so yes, I don't think that it will ever be, because with the spoken word, there's more um what do you call it? More of a connection that the people can have. So no matter how musically literate you are, or maybe literate is the wrong word for it anyway. Some people can hear better the music and some people can't, right? Some people, when they hear instrumental music, they don't even perceive it the way that other people do. So they can't tell if it's good, they can't tell if it's bad, they can't even tell if they like it. So it's a lot harder to make a connection. That's why I think people like Chick Corea and other people who did more programmatic stuff, I think that's why they did that kind of thing, because it does help to make a connection with people who aren't musically, where the music doesn't come that natural to them. You know, the ability to hear and discern. So with the words, you've got that automatically, right? So anyone that can, now, now I think this is one of the reasons why I'm a little different. I've had a hearing loss my whole life. So there's only a few bands that I can actually hear the words that they're singing. So most of the music I heard growing up, I could hear the melody that the vocalists were singing. I could not discern what words they were saying in their singing. So to me, my musical experiences were always about. Rory says, yeah, almost anyone can play air guitar. Yeah, that's right. Yep. And you know, the thing is that people are always trying to tap into that with their instrumental music. I think it helps. I really think it helps if you can do both. If you can sing and you can play, there's the people can't help but be connected to your playing that way. They just can't help it. Then there's the other part of it, right? That if if they can't appeal to you as a musician, if you can't appeal to the people with your playing, then you're gonna do it with your looks. That's another part of the shtick. That's another part of how people make a connection. Now, here's the thing, and I'm not. Once again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you have to be cognizant of what is the image that you're going to portray, right? So just because it's true that people have difficulty connecting with music that doesn't have words, does not mean that we all have to dress um, in a more pop fashion. Sometimes the music demands that we dress in a more subdued way. Like tuxedos make a bold statement, right? That's why the bands often have tuxedos. So that's part of what I'm talking about. The people don't know what it is that you're playing, but if you look serious, they'll take your music serious, right? Richard said, I always sing the music to the best of my ability. I have to hear it before I can play it, actually. Yes. I believe the truth is that everyone has to operate that way. Um, I have a student who's just getting started and he's struggling, and I really believe that his struggle, it's a, I get a lot of, lately I get a lot of adult beginners, and I like that because the adult beginners help teach me how to teach better because they're intelligent enough. You know, the beginners, like the little kids, they can't tell you, hey, the way you're saying this doesn't make sense to me. They can't do that. They don't have the vocabulary or whatever to help you out that way. But the adults, they really do make a big difference in my teaching. Um, and I really think that the reason he's struggling is because he doesn't hear the notes that are on the paper, right? So what I'm going to do with him starting next week is start. He's a jazz fan. I'm going to start helping him learn some Miles Davis tunes so that he can connect what the notes look like and what they sound like. Javier says, like the story you told about the look of the trumpet, the shiny, beautiful ones make a different effect versus the raw, old ones. That's right. Visually, yep. And you know what? All of that is part of your image. You know, we talk about branding. And yes, I've read a whole bunch of business stuff. I think I've told you guys that before. Most of the business stuff I read, well, on the sales side, I don't see this with the other business stuff I've read, I don't see this. But on the sales side of the business stuff I've read, I have to reject most of it because of my religious beliefs. But I've read a lot of business stuff. And when you talk about branding, we have to, as trumpet players, even if you're not a professional, right? You still have a responsibility to brand your product. So, and what kind of horn you have is part of your brand. So if you have, I'll tell you what, this horn here, and it's still not fixed. It's still not fixed. It's still got this gap right here. Um, but I played it in a recital. I played a French solo piece, and the reason I have to say it that way is I can't pronounce the guy's name. So um, it's a sonatina or whatever, and I played it in the recital, and everybody remembers this trumpet more than they remember me. Because I told them, when they introduced me, they asked me to tell them about this weird looking trumpet. And I told them about the story behind the trumpet, which there's not really much of a story about it. But it was enough to connect them to the horn. And yeah, you gotta say, that's part of my branding. Um, and so yeah, I've always played on old beat up horns. You know, that's part of branding too. I'm sorry to say it, but that's part of branding too. Some people may not agree with that kind of approach, but I think a lot of times what it does is when you have an old beat up horn, what it does is it helps endear people to your sincerity. I hope that makes sense. So Rory says, okay, subconscious thought. So to improve, we go one conscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. So are you talking about? Did you see my video about the one I put out this week about the um? Oh yes, you did. I know you commented on it, didn't you? I think you're one of the ones that commented on it, or maybe not. I know I got a comment from you recently. I can't remember whether it was that or a different one. Let me scroll down here. So anyway, um, so let me analyze what you said. We to improve we go one, or maybe you mean first conscious incompetence. That's a good way to put it, right? First, you're conscious, but it's not coming out well. Then conscious competence, that makes sense because you're working it out. It can't be in your subconscious until it's in your conscious correctly. Does that make sense? So that's why, I have this other like thing that I teach. I call it the education formula or the teaching formula. The first thing you do is introduce the topic. And so the part you're talking about there is the introduction. And yes, when you first introduce it, it's going to be a little rough around the edges. Then it becomes, the second one you have there is less rough and more competent. That's correct. Then the second part of my formula is the repetition. You repeat, you repeat, you repeat, and you repeat. Okay? So that repetition is supposed to put it into your subconscious mind if you repeat it correctly. And the stuff that I discussed in that video about the things that can prevent that from happening, that applies here too. Okay? But then the last step of my teaching formula, so you have introduction, you have repetition, and then you have integration, because you have to take what you learn and integrate it with the rest of what you already know. And that's when you have to call on what's in your subconscious. You put it in the subconscious, then by integrating it, you're forcing yourself to call from the subconscious. So yes, it looks like you've got that all worked out. That looks great. Gabriel says, Eddie, maybe a funny question. Selah after you is intended to pause you teaching your method. So, yeah, so, you know, it's very interesting, right? Because there are people who come to my studio. I had one elderly gentleman, and he took lessons, I guess, for a few months. And in his last lesson, he just had to tell me that how peaceful it was in this room. So yes, now I never really made the connection that you're making now, but I have to admit that it's the same, right? I have to admit that it is the same. So anyway, I put that on the wall because, and I know some people get freaked out by this kind of talk. I put that on the wall because the Holy Spirit told me to. Okay? So please don't be freaked out. That's the kind of Christian I am. I try to hear from God. I try to do what God tells me to do. That's why it's up there. But you are absolutely right. The pauses that we have in the music should be that kind of pause. It should not be the kind, remember, I don't, you might have heard me say this or read it in one of the books. It used to be that practice to me felt like drowning. And that's a very high stress scenario, right? Okay? And so yes, that pause to let stuff soak in, and yes, I'm glad you pointed that out. I think it is I think it's actually very cool that you made that connection. I never made that connection, but it is actually there. It just wasn't intentional. Javier says, after 1 week of not playing because of cold sore, I came back and my chops didn't suffer a bit. Ta-da! That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. I used to rely on my lips swelling, but with your method, I rely on muscle. Ta-da! There you go. My chops are way more reliable now. That's what we like to hear. That's what we like to hear. Rory says, forgot to add repetition. Yes, so that's my formula, right? Introduction, repetition, integration. Anything you want to learn, you learn it that way, it's going to stick. Now, the introduction part can kind of be tricky because you want to use a foot in the door approach, right? You don't just like club yourself with new material. You add the new material in a way that you can digest it in small bits. Gabriel says, great, I like it a lot because that word was the first thing I noticed when I saw your first video. So, well, that's good. You know, there's something wrong with it. There was someone who was watching my videos for a while. So I put Selah into Google Translator and I wanted to see what it was in Hebrew. I copied those characters and sent it to my wife. My wife is the one that made that board. And the guy that speaks Hebrew, I think he was in Pakistan. He took a couple lessons. He asked me why I put. Now I might be getting two students mixed up, but yes, there was somebody. Maybe he was in Turkey, but someone who knew Hebrew said, "Why do you have the word rock or something like that, rock or stone or something like that, next to the word Selah?" That's what you get for using Google Translator. Okay, guys, I gotta wrap this one up. I'm going to the airport now. So, yeah, so we'll be back to normal next week. I'm going to be in Phoenix again. Family emergency. So, all right. So God bless you guys. Thanks for hanging out. Sorry we had to make it a short one, but we'll see you next week. All right. Have a great week. Bye.